Hi all, let's meet the creative, award-winning team behind the spectacular Shang-Chi and many other great movies. Welcome, Destin and Simu. The first thing, let's start with saying how magnificent your movie is, okay? It is really, in every respect. It's like really a true original. And I want to ask you a lot of questions. The student want to ask you a lot of questions about it. But first, we want to know how each one of you started in the business.
Oh, that's a great question. Should I? I'll start.
Yeah.
I suppose. I'll be very upfront and say that I did not go to film school of any sort. I truly wish I had. I feel like my education as an artist, as a performer, would be a lot more complete if I did. But instead, I've had to piecemeal it together from being on sets and working with incredible directors like Destin, who taught me so much about the craft. But it's always good to know a little bit about the craft before you start shooting too. That's always, preferable. But I went to college for finance and accounting. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do with my life, and somehow wound up as an accountant, which is very different from acting, even though you can't technically spell accounting without acting. It's a weird coincidence.
That's pretty good.
I've had a long time to think about this, but I wound up, before my 23rd birthday, I got laid off from my job. I was unemployed. I was at rock bottom in my life, and I'd always kind of been enamored by the magic of movies, never really given myself permission to participate. But at that point, having nothing left to lose, I thought, why not? It seems fun, and just went on Craigslist and found myself on student sets, and I was a background performer on movies and TV, and just managed to kind of scrounge up enough of a resume to approach an agent, and then was able to audition for gradually larger things, and then took night classes when I could, and handed out dog food samples on the side of the street during the day, and somehow made it here. I still am in disbelief when I really think about it, but yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
By the way, I read that you went on the set of Guillermo's movie, right? Pacific Rim. I saw him last night. His new movie is incredible. You should all see it. But anyway,
yeah.
But anyway, so when and why did you start doing stunt work? During accounting?
When and why?
During accounting?
Well, I was something of a daredevil when I was in high school. So I when the parkour craze was, it was like a thing that was viral on the internet. So everyone was doing it, and so I was doing it. I was in my backyard with my friends and backflipping off of each other's knees and stuff. So I think I was predisposed to some of the stunt work. And when I started acting, it just really was, more than anything, a means of survival. I was an Asian man getting into show business, and at the time it was like, well, if you're Asian and you're an actor, you got to do stunts of some kind, because otherwise you're never going to work. Right. And so that was just something that I was like, from the beginning, I was like, I have to do stunts. It was like something that I put on myself. And I managed to be kind of like an on again, off again stunt man. I was never any good, but I was the guy that they would call if like the main guy got injured and then the second guy called in sick. They would be like, well, Simu, you come in and do something.
But I read, and it's maybe not true, that even when you start getting lead roles, you will still kind of show up as an extra on episodic TV. Is that any true? Or is it just, or is it Wikipedia?
Oh yeah. No, 100%. I mean, my little break was on a sitcom called Kim's Convenience, which I was on in 2016. but that only shot, 3 or 4 months out of the year. And I was desperate to work. And, in many ways I still am. There's nothing to me quite like the feeling of being on set. So I really just, every day that I wasn't on set, I was dreaming of being able to, so I kept auditioning. I found myself on the set. I wouldn't say extra roles, but like certainly guest stars and co-stars and little gigs here and there. Yeah, and I'm definitely still open to it. So if anybody knows anyone.
Destin, you worked with disadvantaged kids after college. And then you made a movie, a short about it. And that short went to Sundance and won the jury award. And then it became an acclaimed feature. And it's like, write about what you know. I mean, this is like the best example. How did you get that short made?
I mean, when you list it like that, it feels like my trajectory was so easy.
Yes.
but
I was always...
the truth is that I took that job because I could not get any other job at the time, and they were hiring at this place that was called Short Term 12, or the section that I worked at was called Short Term 12. I had some experience working with teenagers and young men and women, so I went and applied thinking that it would be a temporary thing, but it actually was a really life-changing experience for me. I had no idea that I was going to turn it into a film one day, but I didn't turn it into a film till about 4 years after I had worked there. I was in film school at San Diego State University, and my trajectory to where I am has just been a very slow burn with a lot more failures in between that list of successes that you just gave.
Yeah.
But the short film that did go to Sundance was my 8th short film, and I had been rejected from Sundance with all 7 before that. Gotten used to getting a rejection every year from Sundance. That was like part of the routine, and that was the first year that I got the call that I was accepted instead. The short film, I mean, I think there's a lot of short filmmakers maybe listening to this, and the short film was 22 minutes long. Everybody rightfully told me, if you do a 22-minute long short, it will likely not get into any festivals. Like the chances are, it's just shorter is better. And I do believe that, but I just couldn't figure out how to cut it down. It felt like it was the only length if I was going to tell this particular story. And so it was a surprise to get into Sundance. And then it was a extra surprise to win the jury prize at Sundance. There were many, many failures even after that point. Every time there's a big success, I think the human brain thinks, I made it. This is it. I don't have to worry anymore. But I couldn't get a feature off the ground after winning that, pretty much the top prize that a short could do. And I had to realize I have to work even harder. I have to try even harder. And so it took me a lot of rejections to the feature version of Short Term 12. I couldn't get into any labs. I couldn't get funding for it. I had actually completely given up on the script the same month that I ended up getting a call from the Nickel Fellowship that I won that Nickel Fellowship. A huge win, but it was the same script that had been rejected from all of these labs that I was really hoping to get into. So that was a big lesson for me. And then I thought, oh, this huge win, now I can make the feature film, but we still couldn't get funding for it. So I had to write and direct a micro budget feature called I Am Not a Hipster as my first feature film, because I couldn't get funding for Short Term 12. I'm Not a Hipster then surprisingly got into Sundance and was my first time being at Sundance with a feature film. And that ultimately was the thing that allowed me to get the funding to make Short Term 12. And just so everybody knows, even after finishing Short Term 12, I was hoping to get into Sundance, and we got rejected from Sundance, and I felt like a complete failure. I felt like I let everybody down. I didn't know what was going to happen. We ended up, going to South by Southwest and winning the Jury Prize Audience Award, and it's like, that's what launched my career. But I remember the lows just as much as the highs, and they're very low and they're very real. The feeling of being incompetent and a loser is very real, but can be energizing. It can be a positive thing.
Well, because I was prepared to hate you before, because I thought everything just went swimmingly well with no struggle. And here you are. Just like us.
Never does.
Just like us. Which brings me to the other question, actually, for Simu, because I know that both of you let Marvel know that you're interested in the movie. You with a tweet many years ago, and you obviously through management and whatnot. And even then you had to go through a whole series of auditions and pitches and so on and so forth. And so I wanted to ask Simu, because you said that during that process, you had an epiphany about Marvel's superheroes. And how did that realization, that understanding, changed the way that you are? Is he on screen? No.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm here. I promise you.
Changed the way that you then continue to audition for that role.
Right. That's a fantastic question, Destin. I don't know if you seeked out the Marvel. I read, I've heard you say something of the opposite, but I'll let him answer on his behalf. For me, being a superhero is kind of all I wanted to do, and it was on my vision board from like day one of when I got into the business. It was just like this mental exercise that I would do of just kind of looking off into the horizon and saying, what is the make up a role in your head? What is that role that you want more than anything else? And at the time, it was like 2013, 2014. It was like Avengers had just come out. Andrew Garfield was Spider-Man. It was all these superhero movies and big spectacles, and I remember just thinking to myself, God, like we deserve that, people who look like me, people who don't necessarily look like that deserve to be superheroes. I want to be something like that. And so much so that I would write entire series Bibles on my own. I somehow got my hands on a couple $1,000s in funding and wrote and directed a short film where I played a superhero. So it was just very like, when I say I like really manifested, like it was so much more than a tweet. I know the world knows about the tweet and everything, but it was really like, I think I sent it to you, Destin. I saw
that short film. It was really good. It was really good, actually, and really funny.
You do not have to say that. You definitely do not have to say that.
I thought it was really funny.
I made a crew of people shoot in this barn in southern Ontario for like 17 hours. It was the worst shoot ever. But when I actually got the call to audition for Marvel, all of a sudden I became super insecure, because then I started so close to your dream. I was like, well, why would they pick me? Why would they? And I was like I would go into these IMDb rabbit holes and I would be like, well, that person's taller than me. That person's more handsome than me. That person's martial arts are probably better than mine. That person's been a stuntman for 15 years. I was just like, what about me made me special? What made me deserve this role? And I couldn't for the life of me figure it out. But I did get a chance to fly to LA and meet Destin. And the answer lay in in with him, really, in the scenes that he chose for me to audition with, and in that callback where I met him for the first time and we started workshopping those the scene from Rounders, Swingers.
One was Swingers and one was Good Will Hunting.
One was
right?
Good Will Hunting. Yeah.
Really?
Both, like, if you were thinking about, oh, we're doing this, moving about a Marvel martial artist, I mean, who would have thought that those would have been the scenes, right? But it really clued me into what he wanted for that character, which more than anything was humanity and vulnerability. And those were things that, as I got to know him and work with him, I was like, I think I could do that. Yeah, I can't necessarily do the other stuff. I can't be 6'3" and look like Superman, but I can be a human being and somebody who struggles and is flawed and can be vulnerable in front of camera. And that was the epiphany that turned for me, was that what made a superhero relatable was not the super part, but the humanity part. And that thankfully was the beginning of our very long journey together.
It is what I like. As a director, I think you are learning a lot of things from your actors and the emotions that they go through over the course of a movie. And for me, watching what Simu did with this character was very transformative to me. As growing up as a Asian American male, where there isn't a lot of examples of strength and masculinity and just coolness in media with people who look like me. I think it's really easy to overcompensate and just try really hard to just be strong, to be like, I'm strong, I'm badass, I'm cool. To me, like the strength that Simu portrayed in this superhero movie was, yes, some of that, but it was also somebody who is strong enough to show vulnerability, strong enough to be okay to show emotion, strong enough to show insecurity and things that are imperfections. And that to me is like the strength of this character. It's okay to be all of these things. It's okay to show any emotion. You don't have to just be a badass, silent, kick-ass kung fu star. Like, you can deal with your emotions with your dad and your family, and that's cool too.
Yeah, so you are known for being a director of human relationship. And so I understand why, they wanted you, because really you made everybody relatable in this movie. My question to you is, how did you deal with all the complex special effects? Isn't it daunting? I mean, I had to go and do that as a producer, and it was just like, I can't deal with this. Just don't kill anybody and just do it.
It is really daunting. It was very daunting, I think, in pre-production, specifically before I started to get into it. But it really was, as soon as the actor showed up, as soon as Simu and Aquafina and Tony and Michelle and Sir Ben and Munger, all these amazing actors, as soon as we're all on set, whether there's a green screen behind them and we're saying there's a giant monster there, or it's an intimate scene between a father and a son, it really does come down to just a camera and human beings and trying to capture something that feels real. And I felt that was the mandate, even coming from Marvel, that they were repeatedly reminding me of the initial pitch that I gave them, which was at its core an emotional family drama about a father and a son and a daughter learning how to come together after a tragic death. And that trying to capture that emotion in the midst of an action scene and in the midst of this big spectacle was definitely the challenge. But I don't know, when you are comfortable with a group of people, it's like, I don't know, for me, my shoulders relax. Even a big daunting thing is like fun figuring it out if everybody is in it together.
You know,
there were only 2 moments where I thought I was going to go crazy with the special effects, and it was not the fighting or the harness stuff, because when you're in the harness and you're like suspended, it actually is, I think, pretty easy for everything to feel real, because you're just so high up and you're like, like you're already kind of feeling the intensity. But the 2 times I remember, like one time I had to put my hand around like water that wasn't there, and another time I had these rings that were floating around that I had to like pretend that I was looking at, and they're just things that like seem so banal and ordinary, but like when you're doing them, you just feel like you're going crazy, because you're just like, what am I? You're like pretending something is there, and you're looking. Oh man, it was
Yeah, it was like, is that the way you grab water?
Yeah. You know what potentially the challenge was, because in both of those examples, you're supposed to be looking at an imaginary object in front of your hand.
Yes.
But not your hand, and your hand's doing this, and it's really hard to do because you just look at your fingers, and you're like, oh my. Anyway,
listen, I can like talk to you forever and have fun and laugh, but I see that a lot of students want to ask you questions, and this is really for them. Mike, do we have questions?
We do. We have a question here from Miguel de Campollanes. Miguel asks, given that Shang-Chi is part of a big cinematic universe, how much creative freedom did you have when it came to the directing, writing, and overall movie?
That's a Destin question.
I mean, yeah, surprisingly, Marvel gives a lot of creative freedom. Way more than I would have expected, and way more than really most studios I've ever worked for. I think that's a reason why so many Marvel movies feel so different, even though they are still under the umbrella of the MCU. You can really feel the stamp of Taika on Ragnarok. You can really feel the stamp of Ryan on Black Panther, and a lot of that has to do with the trust that Kevin and his team has with the filmmakers that they choose. And I really felt super supported, and it was one of the most I think as a creative experience, it was one of the most fulfilling that I've had.
And it feels like it. The movie, comes through as just a unique and fulfilling experience.
In my first creative meeting too, they were very upfront. I'll just say about the fact that they did not want the comic books just rehashed as well, because we're also dealing with asimilar to the Spider-Mans or the Iron Mans or the Captain Americas. We're dealing with a person of color that, when you look at those comic books from the 1970s, that source material does not lend itself to 2019, 2020, of the times. It was just not progressive. And that character too was not written with an Asian specific lens. And so there are a lot of stereotypes and a lot of problems with that interpretation. So, I think it was a huge relief when that was communicated to me, and that, to know that Marvel was 100% on board with that.
Thank you. We do have another question here from Mariana Romero. Mariana, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for our guests?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I am a producing student, so my question is, what is a great producer according to you? Like, from the director's point of view, from the actor's point of view, what makes you say, this is a great producer and I'd love to work with them again?
I mean, Why don't you go first? I'm actually curious, Simu. From an
What makes
actor's
it
point of
good?
view.
What kind of producer are we talking about? A line producer, creative executive?
Creative.
Creative. Got it. I think the best producers listen. I think the best producers are collaborative, and from an actor's perspective, from an artist perspective, really, it's like we want to be treated as more than just a meat puppet. I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but I've been in situations before, especially early on in my career, where producers treated actors like robots, like they would just move the chess pieces around and they would say, yeah, and then you say this because we tell you to say this, and it's your job just to do what we say, basically. In my experience, that is not conducive to great work for anybody. In my experience, when you put the trust in an actor to be the steward of their character and you empower them to think critically about the decisions that they're making, you get a more baked in product, and you get collaborative artists who will do the work for you, and will do character work, and will show up to set every day with insights that are new and that are fresh and that you may not have seen, but deeply enrich the project. Or it might not work, and you might say, hey, look, this isn't what we're looking for, but at least the conversation was had, at least the space is open. So that, I mean, for me, for an actor, that's the number one thing.
Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. We have a question here from Ushme. Ushme asks, Mr. Liu, can you tell us about a time you thought of giving up and how you found the motivation to keep going?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know
yesterday.
First of all, Destin, I didn't know that you did 7 short films before. That was new to me. I'm glad I heard that. I was I must have been a year and a bit into my career. Basically what had happened was I got an agent very early on. I got really lucky. I got my first speaking role on TV. I got this national commercial. Within about a month and a half of starting out, I was like making, I would say, decent money. And I was like, I can't believe this is easy. If I just, I was like trying to do the math. I was like, if I just book like this for the rest of the year, I will make, and I was like $200,000. I was like, that's crazy, easy. And then I didn't book anything for like a year. And it was like the most demoralizing, crippling thing, because I all I wanted to be was on set. But it was then that I had to take on the infamous side gigs. So I mentioned before, I was handing out dog food on the street corner. I was a Spider-Man for kids' birthday parties. I kind of thought that was at least somewhat performer adjacent. So I was like, yeah, maybe that'll help something somewhere. And then at one point, I actually went back into accounting. I worked for a friend's architecture firm as like a low-level, kind of like a bookkeeper. And that was like the most spirit crushing of all. But what actually made me
crazy. I didn't know that.
What actually made me come so close to giving up was the validate. Like, my parent was feeling how happy my parents were that I got that little tiny accounting job. Like, they were like, wow, thank goodness you finally come to your senses.
Yeah.
And that's the most tempting thing of all, right? It's like, you're like, oh, that's what it feels like. Like, maybe I should just kind of give up on the crazy thing and come back down to earth. But thankfully I did not.
Thank you. We have a question here from JD Rao from our New York campus. JD, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for our guests?
Yep. Destin's got to answer this next one.
Actually, this question is for Destin. Thank you. At the start of your filmmaking career, what was the minimum crew size that you felt you absolutely needed to provide the right level of attention to directing? Like, DP, AD, grip, AC. And can you talk a little bit also about the drivers that slowly led you to increase that crew size?
Sure. I mean, when I shot I'm Not a Hipster, which was my first feature, our budget was really just whatever we could scrape together. So I used $20,000 that I got from the grant from the Academy that year. I put that into the film. My roommate was producing it, and he put in 20,000. And then we asked his uncle to put in 20,000. So we had 60 grand. And we did want to pay our actors, and but I mean, it wasn't a lot. We paid like the lowest low budget thing you could, which is $100 a day. My crew was my DP, who was camera operator. He was the gaffer. He basically did everything. We had one sound man. We had somebody doing hair and makeup. My sister doing costume. And then anytime there were like extras that we had on set those days, we would just ask more friends to come out and help out and give them roles. But it was really that core crew. It was really stripped down. And there's advantages to having that. You can actually capture things that it's very hard to capture once your crew gets bigger. You can capture moments that feel much more spontaneous, and that to me is the reason to scale down, and it actually allows you to capture things that even big budget directors will go, how the hell did you get that? It feels like a documentary. It feels like real life. So that's one way to do it. And then why did I scale up? Once you're in a certain level and you're working with unions, rightfully so, they're protecting their people, and you have to have more people on set. There's kind of no, so even Short Term 12 was about as low budget as you could while still being a union shoot. And our crew was pretty small, but it was big enough to allow us to run 2 cameras at one time, which was very important for capturing cross coverage with kid actors and capturing things that are difficult to replicate. And then you do a Marvel movie, and it's like you're walking into a city when you and that's just a crazy experience.
One sun blocker on a crane. What was like the rental cost of that one machine whose sole purpose is to block out the sun?
But I have to say that the scale of this movie added to the spectacular, experience of it, and those incredible stunts suspended in the air. And it took you to a whole other world. And then there's the lyrical parts, and then there's the emotional parts. And so how really did you, it's like a big operation. It's a big operation, and not that far time from when you did those small scale. So what does it really take to handle that kind of a scale on this kind of a movie? Because it's, so many moving parts at the same time. Destin?
Sorry, I hear my kid crying upstairs. I apologize if you hear it. It really takes, it's a more complicated version of the same thing. You cannot make a movie on your own, and it's all about, to me, it's all about the community that you build and the trust that you put into your actors, into each department head. And for me, it's an ability to manage egos, drama, to manage insecurities among all those people, while still clearly communicating a vision within chaos. It's just always going to feel like chaos, but the closest you can keep communicating what the vision is and the movie is, the better this will turn out. And I found at this level, I mean, I learned so much from doing smaller movies. At the level of a Marvel movie, the train's always going to keep moving, and if you just take a nap for a day, it's going to start moving in a creative direction that is going to be very different than a cohesive movie. And so to keep things all under the same aesthetic, the same tone, it's just a lot of communication. And I am kind of like, at least I try to be an over communicator. Sometimes it can be a little irritating, but I just try to make sure that nothing is being misunderstood, that I am also listening. Like, listening is just as important, because like, so particularly for a movie like this, but in every situation in this movie, the actors knew more about their own characters than I did. So for me to ignore them would be stupid. And so there's a shared, the actors are clearly respecting me and the vision of the movie, and I need to respect them and what they feel is the core of their character. And together we come up with something that feels cohesive.
You know, it reminds me that when Kevin Feige did the Q&A here, and I asked him, what makes a good movie? And he said, you have a community and a team, a good community and team, and you have to trust them. And
I mean, Kevin Feige is an unusual juggernaut of a producer. Usually when and this kind of takes us back to like what makes a good producer, but usually when I meet producers, they are typically telling me their war stories, or their long history of whatever they choose to tell you defines like what type of person they are, what they think is valuable. And usually producers share stories that are validating who they are, how smart they are, what they contributed, and they give you little inside scoops as to that scene in this movie that everybody loves, that everyone attributed to the director. That was actually my idea. He was going to do something different, and I told him this, and then he went and did that. And I've heard many producers tell these self-glorifying stories. To me, that doesn't make me want to work with that producer. What I love about Kevin, the first story that he ever told me, which is so unusual, but he told me a story about the time that he was wrong. He told me a story about a director, and they were getting footage back from a movie that was shooting overseas, and they were looking at the dailies, and he admittedly did not understand what he was seeing. He didn't see the movie. And where other studios would probably freak out and send people over, shut the movie down, replace the director, Kevin said, I don't understand it, but let's just see what
I know which movie this is.
And then Kevin tells me, to the director's credit, 80 to 90% of what I didn't understand ended up in the final movie. And it was because we tested it to an audience, and we saw that all those things he didn't understand initially when he was looking at raw footage really worked. And I was like, just felt so refreshing to hear a producer say that whether he's right or wrong, if the movie works, collectively the team wins, you know, and however we find our way there, if it's working, the team wins. And that, to me, that's a good producer.
Great. Mike, do we have more questions? We have many questions. They'll have to go home very soon.
We do. We have a question here from Malcolm Johnson. For you, Simu, what is the biggest difference, other than the sheer size and budget, between working on a show like Kim's Convenience and then working on a Marvel movie like Shang-Chi?
That's a wonderful question. It's for an actor, it's definitely this. I think the speed and in many ways the care. Although I will say feature films will vary in terms of their budget level and what they are able to accomplish, you know, in a day. Sometimes you will be scrambling, especially early on, you'll be scrambling because you've got, you know, 14 days to shoot a feature because that's all you can afford. But I will say there is a machine-like quality to TV, specifically network TV. You know, it's like, I don't want to get too cynical about it, so forgive me if I do, but it's this idea of like you are writing to act breaks and you're writing to commercial breaks and you're just trying to hook an audience, and so it's very formulaic in that regard. And so the attitude towards acting and performance is like, get it good enough and then move on because we have other things to do. And you know, with a feature film, with the theatrical release, there is no act break. There are no commercials. The audience is making a 2-hour commitment to sit, hopefully, in a theater with you, and so there's just a greater degree of care that's put into every take. And some days we will spend the entire day on a scene that in a TV land would be done in 2 hours, and unfortunately not very well, you know. So it was very refreshing to me to be able to, like, I'm not one of those guys that gets impatient with the number of takes. Like, you'll never hear me say, oh, that's too many takes. Like, I'll always say, should we go again? Can we go again? And it's usually Destin or someone else being like, no, we got it. We're moving on. And I'm like, okay, fine, sure, because I could do it again. But that's just maybe perfectionism and insecurity just manifested, who knows?
Or maybe you just love acting. Maybe you just want to keep acting forever.
I do like surprising you. That was one of my favorite things to do on set, was because, you know, actors, I feel like inevitably it's like you make a choice and you get maybe enamored with the choice, or you're like, oh yeah, that's the choice. And then you're doing it. And before you know it, you've done 5 or 6 takes where, you know, you've more or less done the same thing. But, you know, Destin always gave me credit whenever I did something different. I always had good positive reinforcement from him. So I was always like trying to figure out ways to surprise him that still made sense with the scene, because I didn't want to give him the exact same thing twice.
We have another question here. This one's from Sarah Bottler. Sarah, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for our guests?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Sarah.
We can hear you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for answering my question. And I just wanted to first say, Simu, as a fellow Canadian, I'm so glad to see you doing so well.
Hey.
So yeah, my question for both of you is, with a movie as big as Shang-Chi, I can only imagine the amount of stress that comes with that. And then with the pandemic on top of that, I'm just wondering, what did you learn about managing that stress and being able to stay creative and in the moment? And has your approach and thoughts on that changed over time and through the process?
I have a very long relationship with stress. Anxiety and stress has been a companion of mine ever since I started making movies. It's, you know, the feeling of being exposed. It's why I feel so much for actors, because I even just as a director, I feel so exposed and vulnerable when something that I have poured myself into is played in front of a room full of strangers. And I've felt that since I was making short films. And the anxiety has been at times crippling. At times it's been really, really intense. On this movie, it was really intense in pre-production. That's usually when my brain goes berserk with the mountain of unsolvable problems ahead of me. But in this, through this movie and through every movie previous, I've just learned more about what my particular anxiety is, what it does to my body, how I can redefine it in my brain. I can't avoid it. I know that. I know I can't just act like it's not there, but I have learned to redefine it in a way that I can see it as my brain getting stronger, as my brain figuring something out. I've learned to kind of like redefine it as like lifting weight, the pain of lifting weights, or the pain of running or exercising. That my anxiety typically hits me when I have a giant problem that feels insurmountable. But I've learned to not let it paralyze me. I've learned to like get up, live with it, and use it as an energy to try to solve whatever this problem is. And usually, as long as I stick with it, eventually my brain starts to figure that thing out, and a solution pops up. So I've learned to see anxiety as my annoying companion.
Thank you. We have a question here from Trey Branch from our LA campus. Trey, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for our guests?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. So I honestly just forgot my question. No, I'm joking. Destin, this is actually a question, well, for both of you. As a director, what was your dynamic during filming between you and your lead actor, Simu? And how did you push him to give the amazing performance he gave in the film?
That seems like a question that would be more appropriately answered by Simu.
I think he named you specifically.
Well, I mean, I can't. I'll give my perspective of it, but I mean, I see all of my actors in the same light. I care deeply about them, and I know Simu carried the weight of this movie on his shoulders. He had never done a big movie like this, and he'd never done a movie like this. But I did feel really connected to him. I felt really connected to the way that Simu was exploring this character, was exploring this character's relationship to his father and his family. And there's an emotional through line that I watched Simu create for Shang-Chi that was incredibly moving, but also watching Simu himself as a person, as an actor, as a performer, rise up to this movie and this character, not only in the movie but after the fact, in like the grueling, exposing time that happens after a movie, before a movie is successful, the long time that happens while we are figuring everything out, that Simu has to wait in silence with not knowing what is going to happen, the positivity that he and confidence that he was constantly putting out into the world around this movie, and the way that he has championed not only this film but what the film represents. To me, it's just like, it's all just so moving to me, and I constantly am a bit torn in this industry because so much of it is a bit surfacey and fluffy and just pure entertainment, which is fine. It's totally fine. But sometimes when you see the ugly side of that, and you see people who buy into the self-importance that can potentially come from either being on camera or working in this industry, it can feel very ugly to me. It can feel like a very ugly industry to be a part of. But when I see somebody who gets to the level that Simu is, and handle it with grace, handle it with gratitude, and also, like, we've had amazing conversations, like just processing through this experience and knowing that you're at a level where you could become a pure narcissist if you wanted to, but you're a self-reflective person wanting to grow. That makes me very happy to be in this industry, very happy to be a director. And so there's sort of an answer to your question.
No, thank you so much.
I'll say technically too. Destin was very involved in the process through which I was able to loosen up and sink in, because he's absolutely right. I mean, I was coming in and I wasn't sure how my anxiety would affect me initially, because and again, I've said this before, but I didn't have an education in theater, something, like an educational base that I could always fall back on and say, but I did this, and I'm trained for years in this, I should be okay. I was just a guy who decided one day to go on Craigslist, so in the beginning, I feel like that really manifested in me trying to show everybody that I deserve to be there. And when you're doing literally anything other than being fully present in the moment and trying to make art, you're detracting from that. And so the more I tried to prove myself to either Destin or to the executives or to Kevin Feige, the more I think I was tightening up and not where I needed to be. And it was, Destin has a wonderful way of letting you know that in the best possible way that nobody knows what they're doing. And so you don't have, it's like we're all just trying to figure it out. And on top of that, I think the more that you try, the more that you puff your chest out and you say, it's okay, I got the more the worse it gets sometimes. And so, yeah, he really got me to loosen up. And then he also got me to start thinking about ways in which I could disappear into a character, because the style of acting that I did on Kim's Convenience and for most of the projects that I had done up until that point was playing different versions of myself, right? It's like, authentic reactions, imaginary circumstances, but still internalizing and processing as me, as Simu. Well, what would Simu do in that situation? Well, then the character should do that, And it's a very different thing altogether to disappear. And, we see that in a couple of times in the film when, for example, when Sean is saying, I'm going to kill my dad. I'm like, well, okay, Simu has never had that thought, but it's, Simu has never been locked in an epic battle with his dad either. But it's just, finding ways to disappear and play somebody truly different, which I know is like the definition of acting, but still it's easier said than done. And it was I mean, he just did was kind and nurturing and patient and available and vulnerable, and that was everything that I needed.
Okay, we have a couple of more questions, and then we have to let our guests to go and do their other things, like a crying baby and whatever. Mike?
Whatever it is I do, yeah.
Whatever.
Yes, in your free time.
We do have a question here from Annie Cheng from our LA campus. Annie, we've enabled you to unmute yourself. What is your question for our guests?
Hi, I'm a screenwriting student and I have a question for Simu. So when you read a script, what's the first thing you look for to get into character? Like, do you have to first get the entire story before imagining your character, or do you find some specific scenes to shape your character as you go along?
That's interesting. It's a wonderful question. I will say there's no there's no hard and fast rule for me. And part of it is because a majority of this, I wouldn't say a majority, a lot of the scripts that I read that come across my desk are scripts that actually that weren't written with an Asian lead or a lead of color in mind. And so sometimes, like, if you take it at face value, then you will say immediately, oh, this can't work. So I have tried to adopt the mindset that every script that I read is not a suit off the rack that will just fit me perfectly, but I'm in a made-to-measure suiting store and I'm looking at textures and fabrics. I'm not necessarily seeing the final product, and so it sometimes takes me 2 pages or it takes me 140 before I get to my personal access point to this script or to this character. And sometimes it's something that's not quite on the page, but I see it, I see around it. So I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I think this could work. But that's just honestly part of the legwork that you have to do as an artist of color, because if I was to just say, I want this script to be uniquely tailored to me, and reflect, my ethnicity, my face, or whatever, my cultural background, I will never work. I will literally never work. So it really does change with every project. And I don't know if that's an answer, but
it's a great metaphor. The tailored. Just saying. Great
Thank
metaphor.
you. Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, last question.
We have a question here from Emmanuel de la Cruz. This question is for Simu. And Emmanuel is asking, quite simply, he feels like every actor and actress in Marvel Cinematic Universe has a favorite character. So he wants to ask you, of all the characters in that universe, what character is your favorite, and would you like to see your character interact with them in the nearby future?
Oh, okay, I'll answer. I mean, so many characters are my favorite. I feel like if I name one publicly, it actually decreases the chances of it happening in real life. I've started to learn this about Marvel Studios and its process, right? It's like they want to surprise audiences, and as we've seen with maybe recent movies that have come out, they really are steadfast about trying to keep a big secret, because they like to have the elements of surprise. And so yeah, I don't want to say what I really feel, because then I feel like it won't happen, but I think any opportunity to play in that sandbox with people in that universe is absolutely fantastic. And I just want to say, because I kind of thought of an answer to the previous question, so I just want to tag that on real quick, is that what I'm really excited for all the the screenwriting students that are coming up now is that I think there was a time, speaking to some Asian American screenwriters that are a little bit older than me or came a few generations ago, is that there was a time where writers of color felt like they had to write to a different lens in order to be accepted. And I think now, or I hope now, with the success of this film, with the success of films like this, is that there is a system that exists now for these authentic stories to come out. Like now you have a Destin Daniel Cretton in mind when you're writing that script about a certain lived experience, or you can say, I mean, you don't have to say this, but you can say that I want to write a part for Simu, not just Simu, but you could say, I want to write a part for Munger, I want to write a part for Fala. I mean, there are people who exist that could help get it made and create a system through which these stories can thrive. And I think that's really just incredibly exciting. And I hope I hope I do get that script across my desk that's like, that was written for you. That would be really nice.
I agree. And I think that the fact that you committed to come here and really spend time to talk to students. I think that it was an act of generosity on your part. And my hope is that that generosity is going to pay back to you guys in terms of what they are going to create in the future in terms of screenplays and something that they want to produce, and which is right for people like you, to you yourself, or talent like that. And I think that that is kind of a value on both sides, that this kind of time commitment on your part can create in the world. And so I cannot thank you enough for coming here. I have to tell you that I'm looking at 44 more frustrated students who want to ask questions.
Sorry, guys.
The sequel. And so there's so much interest in you, so much interest that your movie generated, because it was really on another level. Okay, it was unique and another level. And even me, who's not in that, in that universe, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the ones that are really unique, and yours falls into that category. And it was a lot of fun, and it was also touching, and it was everything that we want in a movie. And so I thank the two of you who created that and brought it to us, for also coming and spending your time and trying to help with advice and experience for people who hopefully will be like you in the future. So thank you very much for doing it.
Thank you.
My pleasure. It was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.